Most people don't know what a dead man's trigger is. And even fewer need one. A dead man's trigger is a safety valve. For reasons of security, a person prepares a recourse of such severe action that if harmed, they will release a cachet of damaging evidence against those enemies. Given his situation, Dr. Stephen Greer is one of those rare men. Why would he need one? He's not the first person to push the disclosure of a corrupt military-industrial agenda.
In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
In his final public speech, a farewell address, no less, in a time when every second on TV was priceless, United States President Dwight D. Eisenhower decided not to brag about his victory in the Korean War. Instead, he cashed in all his chips to warn this nation of a hidden enemy.
We have been compelled to create a permanent armaments industry of vast proportions. The total influence, economic, political, even spiritual, is felt in every city, every state house, every office of the federal government. We recognize the imperative need for this development, yet we must not fail to comprehend its grave implications.
When I was with Lawrence Rockefeller at his ranch in 1993, he turned to me and he said, "The implications of this are so vast and so profound that no aspect of life on earth will be unchanged by its disclosure." I said, "Yes, Lawrence, that's why it's been kept secret. It's not because it's trivial. It's because the implications are so profound." So there have been attempts to bring this information out for over 60 years. And here we sit in 2012 with the world still burning oil and gas and coal, when we have had technologies, sciences, and all the information we need to have had a completely new civilization.
What Eisenhower warned us about over 60 years ago, according to Steve Greer, has long become truth in Washington, D.C.
The most music, Q107, driving home with the Spearman. Hello, what are people all over D.C. saying about all this money we are giving?
And why is Washington, D.C. booming? Because the rest of the country is sending their money here.
I know, isn't it beautiful through the trees?
My name is Ted Loader. I've been working with CSETI program and Dr. Greer for 15 years.
Cool, huh?
Wow.
Yeah.
One always wonders if the public really knew what was going on with government covert programs and how much money has been put into it, you know, hundreds of billions of dollars. I think the public would be a little annoyed.
Thomas Jefferson believed all men have the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The government they formed would serve to secure those rights. But when corporations or other specialized groups of men become more powerful than those who govern, our security is at stake.
Thomas Jefferson wrote about unchecked power of the corporation being a threat to the democracy and the banks.
You see, the U.S. Federal Reserve Bank issues every dollar bill, yet it is not run by the U.S. government or any elected official. It is owned by a private banking cartel.
But here I find the chairman of the Federal Reserve who's in charge of the dollar, in charge of the money, in charge of what the money supply is going to be. The middle class is being wiped out, and nobody's understanding that it has to do with the value of money. Prices are going up. So how are you able to defend this policy of deliberate depreciation of our money?
A lot of it depends on what happens to the price of oil.
The four horsemen, or families of banking who own and run the Federal Reserve, also run the four largest oil companies. Oil is also used to make and run machinery and current mechanical technology. Of course, there's one industry that needs these more than anyone else: the military-industrial complex.
You begin to get into this very scary scenario that has to do with the human condition of the proclivity to accumulate vast amounts of power around a handful of people.
All right, sit down and shut up.
And right now, these misanthropic sociopaths are running the planet into the ground.
When Congress or whatever else, or budget directors say, well, we've lost $100 billion in black program, what does the public do? What can the public do? We can complain to our congressmen, but our congressmen can't get any information.
With lobbyists, interest groups, campaign funding, the economic powers that be have learned to control the political sphere.
These politicians become almost like placeholders, and they don't realize that until they get into the White House or into the Senate Intelligence Committee. It doesn't matter who the president is. They're going to do what they want to do.
And that which is good for them isn't always good for everybody else. From 1945 to 1998, 2,053 nuclear bombs exploded on this planet. The United States detonated over half of them.
Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds.
When the first nuclear bomb was exploded in Trinity, Robert Oppenheimer, one of the founding fathers of the nuclear age, said, "We have done this before."
It could have been that Oppenheimer was speaking about weapons described in the ancient Sanskrit texts like the Mahabharata,
in which they refer to a bolt of iron charged with the light of 1,000 suns. This bolt of iron was hurled in anger and led to an explosive event which is very graphically described in this religious scripture, specifically showing all the key indications of radiation sickness and the various problems with nuclear weaponry that we've come to expect.
When we started detonating thermonuclear weapons, atomic weapons, and developing these sort of destructive technologies, the civilizations that have been watching this planet for millennia said, oh my God, these people are going way off the reservation. They are now an existential threat to themselves, but also to other planets, potentially.
All over the world, we see very conclusive evidence that ancient people were in contact with extraterrestrial life. The Japanese said that their civilization was given to them by a people they called the Dogu, who came from what they described as Anemono Torebune, which translates as bird boat universe, meaning flying boats from the universe.
The ancient Sanskrit writings in India have elaborate descriptions of vimanas, or flying craft. These texts are thousands of years old. They predate any conception that we have of spacecraft or aircraft.
But evidence is not just found in ancient texts. It is also captured in our ancestors' art, as if it was plainly obvious that ET vehicles appeared in ancient skies. It is a foregone conclusion by most broad-minded people that we are not alone in this universe. The question is, how close are they?
And we all looked up at once. It was almost like an intelligence told us, hey, look over here, we're here.
Saw 3 red lights in a triangle almost directly overhead.
I saw these things and I ran inside and got my brothers and sisters.
It actually lifted up and it could actually turn.
I'm gonna ask you to look away. I love my hands, but
I wasn't one who believed that UFOs might exist. I was satisfied they exist.
the life I have isn't what I'd seen.
They estimated 100 yards from the left wing was this 100-foot disc.
A lot of the astronauts are told to keep it quiet, and they're good Americans too. They develop the film from the moon, everything that's done by NASA.
Ma che se ne sanno ancora degli altri superiori.
There's so much evidence out there that even if less than 1% is true, that would be enough to collapse the current paradigm and change the whole planet.
This is our signature tones that we broadcast over a small walkie-talkie. They were recorded in a crop circle. What happens is the extraterrestrials, they come into the area where we vector them in with the signature tones that we broadcast. Then it enables them to home in and get a real good fix on where the site is where while we're setting up.
The whole concepts of the crossing point of light, the physics of consciousness, and interstellar communication all were developed on a kind of a vision quest we did here in 95 or 96.
Astronomer J. Allen Hynek developed a scale to identify the types of human ET encounters. From his original 3 categories, a 4th, more controversial, has been added, CE4. Even more controversial, Stephen Greer added a 5th kind of encounter, CE5. Human-initiated contact. So, how is this done? Given Schrodinger's idea that the number of all minds in the universe is 1, in order to make this type of contact, a human could potentially access that single inner consciousness through intense meditation and then visualize his location down through the Milky Way to the planet Earth to wherever he sits under the stars. In theory, then, any extraterrestrial passing by would be able to hear the broadcast and know exactly where to go, if they choose to do so.
It's interesting how many people have never been out in a place like this where they can see the whole Milky Way galaxy. Most people who come for a week, it alters their life.
There's meditation techniques, there's remote viewing techniques, and once you start learning these processes and refining them, then you can make contact more quickly, more easily, and be more of an asset to the group.
Checking to be sure that there's no source from anyone else so that when we do start having electromagnetic signals through this, we know that it's a legitimate source.
My name's Emery Smith. I've been with CSETI for approximately 3 years.
Getting the baseline reading from us.
My duties consist of a couple things. I am Dr. Greer's head security detail. I also and they're a photographer. I operate anywhere from 2 to 6 cameras at one time.
Yeah, that's our craft. It was over the mountains in this direction.
Many of the craft that are coming in are transdimensional, and the way I understand it, not visible to the human eye. And that's where this new technology, night vision, that's where that's coming into play. And
with the advent of new technology that's out there, it becomes easier and easier for us to capture these beings and these celestial objects on film.
After you do the night vision, it has that green hue, of course. And after a while, when you get back to real life, you're thinking, why isn't everything green? This can't be reality.
I want to show an early one from Gulf Breeze from 1992. We went down there, and one of the fun things that happened is that I had about 40, 50 people. Let's go out on the beach. And we didn't have good cameras then, but you'll get the feeling of how exciting it was. Have all these people, and 1, and then 2, and then 3, and then 4 ET craft materialize right in the sky.
There it goes, 1, 2, 3. And look, there's 4. There's 4. There's 4. We have a confirmed CE5. Holy damn hot shit. Dog. Thank you. All right.
So the point, the point is, it's fun. It's your responsibility to go into meditation, find a little bit of time, 10, 15 minutes, and remote view who's up there and how many.
I can attest to the fact that real phenomenon happens here. I really feel that his CE5 protocols are based on a spiritual kind of positive contact, and I think that that is an excellent model for any kind of communication, whether it be on Earth, in the United Nations or wherever, but in this particular field it's with cosmic cultures.
And we use consciousness, meditation, visualization, remote viewing, certain tones, and we do it in a group when we can, or even as individuals.
It's just been this series of unbelievable events that are amplified by our meditation. It enforces this communication between us and the ETs, and it's so interactive.
I can feel everything, I can hear all the sounds just right there.
Perfect.
And then this being the little larval one comes up, and we had this hug, and I shared the joy in it, and I'm like just thanking it for this experience. And let's do what we can to feel as if it would feel that this is perfectly normal and natural.
Oh, sure.
And that, this is...
Relax and get in that flow consciousness, exactly.
So I was jarred by our group getting tripped out and in that kind of, I was startled by some of the ways that our group was being, and I was going, and then there was moments where I was like, wow, I can only imagine how a visitor might feel.
The ETs pick up on your intentions, and if you're really out there just to learn and really want to communicate with these extraterrestrials, well, it's going to happen.
Avahanam Narayanam Padma Bhavam Vasishtam Shaktim Chatat Putra Parasharam Cha Yasam Shukam Golda Param Mahantam Govinda Yogindra Matashashisham.
And we ask these extraterrestrial civilizations to join us as they begin to learn of us, to help us, and to understand us, even as we endeavor to understand them and welcome them here to this beautiful planet.
Oh my gosh, another beautiful, stunning, absolutely stunning. Not an airplane.
Oh, here comes a military plane, very quick. Yeah, there's a very fast military. Okay, they're gonna go. Oh. It turned right to it. Yeah.
Literally, my heart literally sunk when the jet, you know, got to where the craft had to phase out. Yeah. And like to feel all that love build, and then to feel that jet coming in, and it was like on a heart level, my heart literally sunk when the jet crossed the path where it had to take off.
So in the camera, that's what you got. You got like this light traveling, and you can see it's not like a satellite where it's got like a path. It's got like a, you know, like a movement. Yeah, and then it's gone.
When I was 17, I injured myself. I got so infected, and at the time, because I was very poor and I didn't have any health care, I just laid there and I got sicker and sicker and sicker, and I had a near-death experience. I found myself out in deep space, and it was this experience of complete oneness with the cosmos, not just with Earth and life on Earth, but with the stars and the infinity of creation. It certainly altered the course of what I would end up doing, because I then learned meditation. I actually became very aware of the power of the mind.
This experience helped guide the direction of his life. Though Greer went on to earn a medical degree and raise a family, he continued to study consciousness and contact. And decades later, it seems he would be the doctor called upon first to examine a very unusual body.
This came to us in the last couple of years, and there's a man who runs an institute in another country that I cannot talk about. But he came into possession of a little creature. It is humanoid. It does not look human.
We have acquired an EBE, an extraterrestrial biological entity. We're flying over to Europe soon to take some tissue samples and do some DNA testing.
This was found in the Atacama Desert. We don't know how it came about. Here's the great view of the face and cheekbone, very complex. Now there is a fracture here, and behind this right ear is caved in, and that's how this ET being was killed.
We have the best scientists in the U.S. from Stanford that are going to be doing the testing itself to see what this really is, and also to rule out what it's not.
The initial reaction that I had is the same reaction that many of my colleagues here at Stanford and elsewhere have had when I've shown them, is that, wow, what is this? The question is important enough in at least two ways. The primary reason is that there's a lot of claims about specimens and claims about aliens. And of course there's a lot of ridicule associated with that. So one of the best things that we should be doing, of course, then is bringing the best scientific techniques to bear. The techniques are available, the techniques are cheap, the answers are nearly absolute, so let's do it. And it's so exciting because it's not just... In setting up for this, I'm going to be giving Steve not only the tubes that this should be going into, but I'm also going to be sending across the microscope that I feel they should be using to do the analysis with. Before we even get started with some of the analysis, I think it's going to be important to rule out some of the obvious critiques that could come up. And one of those critiques is that this is a syndrome or a mutation. This is a bone dysplasia. And luckily, here at Stanford, we happen to have literally the world's expert, the man who wrote the book on bone dysplasias and syndromes, a gentleman by the name of Dr. Ralph Lockman, who has kindly agreed to look at the specimen, both the pictures as well as the CT scans and the x-rays, to help determine whether or not it's anything that he's ever seen before. I think that a dozen or even 15 years ago, answering the question of what is this would really not have been possible because the kinds of technologies were not available as are available today. But really the DNA tells the story, and because we have the computational techniques, that allows us to determine in very short order whether in fact this is human. So this will be basically an absolute level of proof as to what this actually is.
The problem is not proving that UFOs exist. It's when you begin to expose the energy and propulsion systems behind how they're getting here. You're talking about unveiling an entirely new science that would replace oil, gas, coal, nuclear power, public utilities. And this is the $600 trillion problem.
So the patent office, after they fired me, I had to wait 6 years before I got rehired. Everybody at the office was avoiding the case. But when they finally did, the arbitrator wrote an 85-page report on how the media had caused my dismissal. So I only got a 30-day suspension out of the whole thing, which was taken out of the tiny little bit of 6-year back pay. So that was great. Yeah, it was. Yeah, it made it all worth it, so to speak, because that's how we were able to open the offices and stuff.
It was very comfortable. No feeling of being shocked or anything else, just a good feeling, comfortable.
What scientists need to do and normal people need to do is they need to look at the hardcore evidence, decide that, oh my gosh, ETs are real, and then get over that. And if that's the case, then you can start extrapolating because they're getting here, which means they have solved the physics problem, if you will.
That's an actual photograph that Mark Whitford took, a friend of mine. And you see the stars in the background. So this is a fixed camera. The craft was a triangular craft moving away from him, and all of a sudden it makes a right-angle turn. Apparently it has what I would describe as inertial shielding. It's the only way something can make a right-angle turn without having everybody killed inside of the craft.
Though we experience inertial forces every day, their origins remain a mystery. However, there are theories that point to interactions between objects with mass and a quantum energy field.
Inertia is due to the zero-point energy interaction. So you're interacting with a charged matrix, which is a zero-point field. If you try to change that, then you get a reaction force. There must be an interference shield of electromagnetic nature that would stop that interaction with the zero-point field. And you can suspect that UFOs have already figured this out because they wouldn't be flying around and still have inhabitants.
New energy scientists today are attempting to find new ways to define the relationship between electricity, gravity, magnetism, and propulsion. But as history has shown, change does not always come easy.
It's like Newton. Why is that apple falling? Nobody ever asked that question before or even tried to come up with an answer. And Newton comes up with something called Newton bucket, or Newton's problem. The only guy that solves it 300 years later is Einstein. So, how smart can we be? If you look at everything normal within the conventional wisdom, you're not going to learn anything new.
My name is Morgan Boardman. I am the Chief Financial Officer of Morningstar Applied Physics. My business partners are Paul Murad and Dr. John Brandenburg.
What we're doing, like I said earlier, is we're using a magnetic field that's rotating about the axis with the hope of generating a magnetic vortex.
In essence, we are trying to start a civilian advanced research projects agency.
Okay, all right, so basically we have 4 options. Option 1 is a retarded potential. Option 2 is a lagging image, right? Yeah. Option 3 is pointing vector as a motive for propulsion, or how that may be what's happening, right?
Yeah.
And that's actually taking angular momentum and changing it into linear momentum if it's working the way we want it to, right?
Yeah.
Okay, and then the fourth one is that we are somehow either generating and or absorbing gravity waves.
You got it.
Do we accept Einstein's viewpoint that thou shalt not go faster than the speed of light? If you look at a black hole, the comment is the gravity is so strong that nothing leaves. But it does have something that leaves the black hole, and that is gravity. So does that imply that gravity moves faster than the speed of light? Could be.
Gravity is another one of those seemingly self-evident forces that has raised a number of questions. How does it really work? How can we use it to our advantage? In the mid-1920s, T. Townsend Brown discovered that electric charge and gravitational mass are coupled, and that by building devices that harness these interactive forces, we could create advanced propulsion. At about the same time, Nikola Tesla and Thomas Edison won the Nobel Prize in physics, but both refused it. Tesla was at the end of a long career of inventing. He had advanced technology in the fields of X-ray, radio waves, internal combustion, and of course, atmospheric electricity. When everything was said and done, he had earned 112 US patents. He proved that electricity can travel wirelessly in the air, and ultimately died penniless. However, his work did influence many others, most notably Lester Hendershot and Dr. T. Henry Moray. Hendershot invented a magnetronic generator to energize an impossible flight, if fueled by gas, that took Charles Lindbergh and the Spirit of St. Louis from New York to Paris. Dr. T. Henry Moray developed the Moray valve, a device for extracting radiant energy from the zero-point field, and demonstrated this device hundreds of times and had dozens of signed affidavits supporting his science. Yet in the end, even these two notable scientists were ignored and bullied. Dr. Moray's device was hammered down and broken into pieces by a competitor, and before he could finish reconstruction, he passed away of natural causes. Hendershot fled to Mexico to continue work, but was found dead at 61 years of age, attributed to suicide.
There's all kinds of skullduggery that happened there. I don't think T. Henry Moray ever got a decent chance to ever do anything with that. There is absolutely no question that T. Henry Moray had a system that produced about 50 kilowatts out of a 55-pound box. The conventional electrodynamics model does not allow this to happen. In other words, it doesn't allow you to extract excess energy from the vacuum and use that to power your load. It costs just as much to restore it as was used to destroy it. So we got to put in more than we can ever get out in a load with such a squirrely circuit. And that's the only kind of circuit we've used in power systems since day one. We're still building them. We're still making power systems that deliberately kill them. So we pay the power company to have a giant wrestling match inside his generator and lose.
In the 1950s, there were some very provocative articles saying that, oh, electrogravitics is the best thing since sliced bread, how all the aviation companies are now backing electrogravitics, they're all doing experiments on it. Well, within a couple of years, there was no news at all.
Once they figured out that they could really control gravity, 1954, it all went black.
Do you think the boys in the black projects have solved that problem? Because it sure sounds like it from what the witnesses have told me.
I wouldn't know. I wouldn't know. Sorry, but I can't even think about it. I see so many things in my life, it's just hard to say.
A local inventor has discovered a way, hear this, to use water to run your car.
What Stan shared with me was interesting.
In order to run this engine off of water, we've also had to learn the ability to adjust the burn rate of hydrogen to co-equal the fossil fuels.
So he applies for a patent, and then he gets a call from actually a visitation by two guys from the Pentagon.
The Pentagon flew a lieutenant colonel in last week to look at Meyer's invention. There's talk of possibly using it in the Star Wars defense program and to run Army tanks.
But he asked that this become a public patent so that the civilians could benefit from it. And he indicated that if we don't do that, overseas people will.
In 1996, Meyer was sued by his investors, who claimed the device was not revolutionary, despite verification of the unique voltage intensifier circuit by the U.S. Patent Office. Meyer was brought to trial, but key evidence was not allowed. His oral testimony was not even recorded, due to an audio recorder malfunction, and the judge recessed early for vacation. Later, Meyer made an appeal, but was denied. He was found guilty of fraud and ordered to repay his investors, putting an immediate dent on the idea of funding new technology. On March 20th, 1998, Stanley joined his brother and 2 NATO officials for a dinner meeting. Stan took a sip of cranberry juice, grabbed his neck, ran out of the restaurant, and fell to the ground, saying, "They poisoned me."
He fell down after eating at a restaurant nearby where he lived, fell down the parking lot, said, "I've been poisoned," collapsed.
And that's on the police report?
Yeah.
The police report confirms his words. The cause of death was written to be an aneurysm, though he left behind just enough materials for others to piece together his process. The full secrets of his device died with him.
So from this, I began to do more work with the administration, various people, friends of the president, the Rockefeller family. Lawrence was the white hat in that crowd who wanted us to bring this information out, actually hosted us at the Rockefeller Ranch in the Tetons. And one night he pulled me out on the deck and he said, "Well, you know, we really need you to do this." I said, "Lawrence, you're old, you're rich, and you're Rockefeller. What do you want me to do? I'm just a country doctor banging around in an ER in North Carolina." He says, "No, we want you to do this." I went, "Okay." So I'm the throwaway guy. I'm the guy you can throw away because my life doesn't matter.
We are back in Rachel, Nevada with our first 2 distinguished guests. Stephen Greer is a North Carolina doctor. He does a lot more than watch the skies. He fires off messages, and he says that someone or something is responding. Dr. Greer is looking for close encounters of the 5th kind. What, at this minute, do you believe?
Our assessment at this point is that there is at least one extraterrestrial civilization which has managed to make its way to our corner of the universe. And number 2, that there's no evidence at all that they have hostile intentions towards this planet. And number 3, that the priority at this point must be trying to establish some sort of a liaison to them, some sort of a diplomatic liaison to them, and that's what we're working on.
Is there a continued cover-up? Yes. Do those at the highest levels of government agencies know that there's a cover-up? Not necessarily.
Officer X, a high-ranking military veteran, joined forces with Dr. Greer in order to use his military and government influence to gain access to high-level officials.
I was able to arrange for a sea-setting briefing to the then Vice Director for Intelligence for the Joint Staff, Admiral Tom Wilson, the same person who had been at Atlantic Command with me. At that meeting was Steve, Apollo 14 astronaut Ed Mitchell, Brigadier General retired Steve Lovkin, Syrian Aramaic, Steve's right arm.
Well, Dr. Greer did indeed mount an initiative and did go to Washington, did speak with high-level government people. I attended and helped him with that. We briefed certain members of Congress, some of their staff, some of the people from the White House. We talked with people in the Pentagon. It led me to the belief that people in high-level government have very, very little, if any, information, valid information.
One of the most important of all the meetings was with CIA Director R. James Woolsey.
Here I fly up to Washington. The cover story was a dinner party. One of the things that I found was that this CIA director wasn't lying when he communicated to us that he had not had access to these projects. He was shaken to his core We met for not 20 minutes, almost 3 hours. And by the end of it, I handed him, my hands were shaking, and I handed him this document. And it was a position paper recommending executive orders and the things the Clinton administration and he needed to do to get control of this mess. And he looked at it, and he looked at me. He says, yes, he says, but how do we disclose that which we have no access to? And I almost wept. I went, what?
Dr. Greer approached many D.C. officials in an attempt to gain an audience. One of the people who took him seriously was former CIA Director Bill Colby.
If there's truth in it, there can be a danger in that situation. We've seen that happen in other cases. I said, you have to consider the possibility of some danger to not only your reputation, but to your person. I mean, people do react rather violently to some kinds of charges, or particularly if they're true.
Now, you know, I'm a 30-some-year-old doctor with 4 kids, a golden retriever, and a house in North Carolina. So I'm going, this is down the rabbit hole fast. But that is the situation, my friends, when you're dealing with secrecy that is criminal and illegal.
In 1997, in an effort to push his message deeper into Congress and the White House, Greer headed to Phoenix to prepare a video with his best evidence to show in Washington, D.C. While he was in the editing room, the biggest UFO witnessed event in history was about to happen.
On March 13th, 1997, when the Hale-Bopp comet was very clear in the northwest sky, thousands of people were outside trying to get a glimpse of it when they also caught a glimpse. These orbs, giant orbs, equidistant in a V formation of 1 mile to 2 mile wide in some very credible reports.
And that's the particular area where these phenomena keep popping up from my vantage point. The Native Americans living in the basin between South Mountain and the Estrellas have told me that not only were they looking up at the Phoenix Lights during the mass sighting, but they've been looking up at them for centuries.
I live in a community called Loop, northeast of Flagstaff, on the Navajo Indian Reservation. We'll have to go back in time one day before. We saw 6 to 7 lights that were circling along the horizon. The entire street came out. It was almost like a block party. Everybody turned off their lights, everybody sat in their front yards, and everybody watched this unusual light show.
I squeezed down the best of what I found and finally came forward in 2004 with the Phoenix Lights, a skeptic's discovery that we are not alone.
10,000 people approximately witnessed this, one of the largest experiences of this sort ever recorded.
The Phoenix Lights phenomenon didn't seem to be falsifiable in any way. It was being validated by most everybody that saw it.
The ultimate, shall we say, insult was the governor of the state of Arizona, Fife Symington, finally calling a news conference saying that he has finally got the answer to the Phoenix Lights, and he introduces some staff member dressed up as a space alien.
People got very angry because here is the top elected official of the state making fun of what I estimate to be close to probably 10,000 people saw this.
Under the watchful eye of the public, Symington retracted his statement.
If you had been here 10 years ago and standing out here and looking up there at the lights and the view, you would have been astounded. You would have been amazed.
The so-called Phoenix Lights were seen by many people in 1997. Skeptics say they were military aircraft or flares, but not the former governor.
It was probably some form of an alien spacecraft.
On our way to Barcelona. Barcelona.
Dr. Bravo.
Hi, Dave.
Are you ready for the trip?
I'm ready for the trip. I'm so excited.
Okay.
We're going to do some very wonderful work, and I can't wait to get the results.
Upon arriving in Spain to look at the being for the very first time, I was kind of skeptical. It was definitely a game changer for my thought process to actually see it in person than to see it on film. The first thing we had to do was go to the radiology lab because we needed x-rays and CAT scans before we did anything.
Porque esto es, ya se lo comenté que era un poco difícil de hacer. Es, ¿okay?
The best we can get.
Lo mejor que podamos. Porque evidentemente no se puede manipular para nada.
No.
The head radiologist at the center saw the beam and was quite impressed. And the first thing she said was, "Wow, that looks like an alien."
That's really okay. This is fabulous. Yeah. Okay, that's good.
This one is complete.
When the CAT scan images started coming up on the computer, it was just profound. And I saw inside the bone, and I saw, organs and lung material, brain material. I knew that this was not a hoax, it was not fake, that this was actually some sort of living creature.
Right, well, if somebody made it, they have a future in microsurgery because they were smart enough then to put in these millimeter-wide bone holes where the arteries go in to feed the bone marrow. And so now the challenge is to prove what it is, right? My interest, frankly, is to disprove that it's anything unusual or anything paranormal. I would like to prove that this is human. I would like to prove that this is just an interesting mutation, but obviously if you leave your mind open, or I should say if you leave your mind closed to alternatives, you'll never see what those alternatives might actually be. In every situation with scientists, your reputation's at stake. I have every expectation that even doing this is going to lead to some ribbing from some of my colleagues, right? But I think that that's perfectly acceptable because at the end of the day, who's going to validate these things? If someone isn't willing to step forward and do it right, then you're going to have it sitting out there forever, hanging in limbo, right? I mean, if you let other people and their opinions stop you from believing what you know to be true, then all you're doing is stopping the possibility of progress.
Anytime anybody tries to study this subject seriously, we're subject to ridicule. I'm a full professor at a relatively major university, and I'm certain that my colleagues at the university laugh at me and hoot and holler behind my back when they hear that I have an interest in studying unidentified flying objects.
There's really a subtle kind of suppression at play here. You don't worry about what the CEO of Enron thinks about what you say. You worry about what your friends think. You worry about what your parents would think if you posted whatever you care about on Facebook or something.
We take the risk to appear to be a crackpot. There may be people who are going to be threatened by that for any number of reasons.
My feeling was that I was involved in a lot of strange activities, so I tried to say to myself, let's not look at this with too much exposure and mention it because there's a question of credibility.
This should be the subject of rigorous scientific investigation and not the subject of rubbishing by tabloid newspapers.
MUFON is the Mutual UFO Network, and it was founded in 1969 by Walt Andrus. And our mission statement is the scientific study of UFOs for the benefit of humanity. MUFON is the world's largest UFO investigative organization. We have approximately 3,000 members worldwide. Approximately 500 of those have their PhDs. These are people who really would like to delve deep into the UFO phenomenon and try to figure out not only what it is, but how it's happening.
Armed with what he thought was some of the best available evidence, including the Phoenix Lights, Steve Greer organized a Project Starlight briefing before several Congress, Pentagon, and White House staff members. things seem to be on track for disclosure.
Of the device and the internal, all of it, with a lot of detail, and this is a cutaway. This was done and escaped government control, whereas the Bentwaters case took 20-some years in England. So this is in our possession and not the Ministry of Defense. So,
where it would never be found.
Where it would go into a black hole. Right.
But then, the bad news came. Sherry Adamiak, Steve's partner and longtime friend, along with Steve and another team member, were all suddenly diagnosed with a malignant cancer.
I've had these experiences since I was a child or a young man, but to articulate them so other people understand them, I need someone with capacity to hear it. She was that person. I mean, it's been,
you can't resolve
it's
things.
been very hard for me.
Oh yeah,
you know,
I know.
Get up
I know
every
it has
day,
been.
you know, but. One of the last places she wanted to come was here. So she asked that her ashes be placed on the land. So we put her ashes around that tree. I don't take anything for granted, frankly, and so each time that I do a presentation or lead a group, I think this may be the last time. The thing that has kept me going the most is not any external thing, but the experience of that near-death experience where I know that there's an aspect of us that doesn't die. That is why I can go mano a mano with these elements and not be afraid. I shouldn't say be afraid, not stand down. Everyone has fear. I've certainly had my fears. But it gives you an anchor so that you can go forward.
More than ever, Dr. Greer understood what he had always sensed. It was not the power of a cosmic field or quantum vacuum that would propel us into a new world. It was the mind.
This really is the opening to an entirely new science of consciousness.
You can maybe think of consciousness as a television set. On the TV screen you see pictures and sounds and so forth, and if you tried to find out where that was coming from and you looked inside the television, you're not going to find it. It's not there. The signal is in the radio waves around it, invisible to us, that's being interpreted by the television as pictures and sounds. So this is very much like the state of how we understand the mind and consciousness.
Dr. John at Princeton proved that putting your awareness on a device that was a random number generator would affect it.
So you have this random number generator and it's producing 50-50 ones and zeros. And then you introduce a person into the picture and you tell them, try to affect it with their mind. Think more ones or more zeros. You measure that, and sure enough what they found was that there are more ones or more zeros being produced that correlate to that person's intention. So we can see effects being produced forwards and backwards in time, which is really strange. Distance doesn't seem to matter as much. You can get the same strength of effects if you're right in front of the REG or if you're on the other side of the planet.
Consciousness is a non-local field, and it isn't limited to your brain waves and body.
Dr. John once had the opportunity to ask the Dalai Lama if he thought the random number generators themselves were conscious. And the Dalai Lama thought about it, and his reply was that if you think they're conscious, then they're conscious.
Just like consciousness can have positive effects on the zeitgeist or ether, it can also work the other way.
Unfortunately, when you start to deal with inventors who have anomalous results that seem to be over unity, paranoia seems to accompany that process. And John Searle's famous for having a circular magnetic device that has both energy and propulsion built into one unit.
And the electric company felt that this guy was stealing money, took him to court, went to jail, his house caught fire, and all of his property and all of his designs burned.
The concept of freedom, this sort of idea of people having the liberty to pursue happiness and to pursue abundance, this has been completely, in a sense, turned upside down.
We actually reprinted a report on the military involvement of the Department of Energy. And it's so extensive, it's the major operation that goes on there.
There have been over 5,000 patents that have been sequestered by the national security state, taken out of the public domain. Many of them deal with energy technologies.
It's a policy that the military seems to feel is necessary for national security. However, at this point, we often wonder, 50 years after World War II and the Cold War, whether such sequestering is necessary.
Suppression of new technology would be an obvious plague on the idea and strength of a free market system. Yet, it still seems to happen right in front of our eyes.